Hello and welcome to Knitting on the Lake. My name is Kelly and I am your host. Today we're going to deviate a little bit from what has been the typical format to what I sort of planned my typical format to be, which is a more topical podcast about something that I feel particularly passionate about and that I want to share with all of you. That topic is my go-to workhorse yarns for knitting things for babies and kids. Before we get started, I will share what I am wearing. This is a no frills sweater, and the pattern is by Petite and the yarns that I used are Juniper Moon Farm Herriot Herriot Fine. That is an alpaca yarn with like just a little bit of nylon fingering weight. And I don't remember the color number, but I will definitely put it in the show notes. I think the fibers from my sweater are probably flying around right now, and forgive me if they're showing up on camera. That yarn is held together with a Isager silk mohair. And again, it has a number, not a name. And I will also put that in the show notes. I definitely learned a lot from making this sweater. I won't go into too much detail on it. I really like it. I'll throw some pictures up there so you can see the full length. It's definitely a less dimensionally stable sweater, I guess I could say, given what it's made out of. I don't think I would ever make a sweater again out of this kind of fiber composition, being mostly alpaca with just like a small thread of silk mohair kind of trying to hold everything together. That said, it's incredibly light, soft, and cozy, and I love wearing it. I would really like to make another no frills sweater someday. I think it's just a really basic, as the name would imply, a really basic raglan sweater pattern that, I think, again, if I used maybe a smaller needle and a different yarn combination, that, maybe the neckline would be a little bit tighter. But, other than that, I really like the fit. And again, I love wearing this sweater. Okay, so let's get to the topic, and I'll back up a little bit just to explain why this is a sort of a subject that's very interesting to me and that I'm very focused on as a knitter. I am an interior designer by trade. I spent over 10 years running my own interior design business, Kelly Rogers Interiors. And as an interior designer, my focus, actually my whole founding mission, was to create spaces for families that were just as practical as they were beautiful. So I really believed, and I still believe today, that everyone should be able to have a beautifully decorated home, no matter if you have babies, kids, that it is possible, by making some smart choices in terms of your furnishings and finishes and materials, that you can have, you can live in spaces that are unique and thoughtfully decorated and designed, but that also stand up to real life. So therefore, it is no surprise that I am also very passionate about finding and using yarns for baby and kid knits that bring together the best of all worlds. And for me, that includes easy care, a soft hand, so next to skin softness for kids who can often be more sensitive than adults. And a lot of us adults are also that sensitive as well. And hardworking durability. We want those things to last, even though they may have a shorter lifespan than an adult garment or blanket or whatever the object is. They're going to get beat up that much more because they're worn by babies and kids. So there are a few yarns that I turn to again and again for these types of projects. And believe it or not, none of them is 100% acrylic. Now this may or may not surprise you depending on your own knitting experience, your own ideas about knitting. It definitely surprised my mom, I think, as she really only had exposure to my grandmother who was knitting, through the 60s, 70s, and 80s when acrylic was sort of like the new and exciting thing that was going to solve all the problems of wool yarn. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with 100% acrylic yarn. I've knit many projects in acrylic. I haven't knit any recently, but especially when I was starting out, I used a lot of acrylic yarns that were quite soft and very durable. So there's definitely a place for all types of yarn in every single budget. It's just not a category that I'm as familiar with now, so it's not one that I'm going to talk about. So again, definitely not disparaging acrylic yarns or other synthetics. But it is something I definitely want people to be aware of, that there's a whole world of yarns out there that are very kid friendly and very good to use for kid and baby knits. And the really great thing is that we don't need to limit ourselves to just one type of yarn. We can pick different kinds based on the type of object that we're making, the preferences of the child, the type of visual effect that we're going for. So there's a lot of different options out there for us. Another thing I really want to emphasize before we get into it is that I think personally there is a time and a place for virtually any type of yarn, even if it's like the scratchiest wool lopey yarn for kids knits. I definitely am not opposed to doing that. I'm not opposed to making things for kids that need to be hand washed. I just think oftentimes when we're giving gifts, we don't want to put too much on the parents and assume that they're going to be willing to hand wash clothing for their kids, because they may or may not be willing to do that. So because these items are often made as gifts, I think it's nice for us to make those things out of yarns that are machine washable. So that is the one thing that all of these yarns I'm about to share with you have in common, is that they're all machine washable, generally on the gentle cycle in cold water. And important to note is that they should not be put into the dryer. And I don't really see this as a disadvantage. I think it's very kind of common and expected for people who are doing laundry to remove things from the laundry before they go in the dryer, like jeans, for example, other things that are prone to shrinking, or, things that they just want to air dry. I know a lot of like athletic clothing that contains synthetic fabrics like Lycra is not supposed to go into a dryer. That doesn't mean I don't throw it in sometimes, but that's kind of getting away from the point. So I think, again, that machine washability is sort of like the entry-level criteria. But again, the softness and the feel of the yarns, as well as the durability, really factor into my criteria for these yarns kind of meeting the workhorse status. The first yarn that I want to share with you is Debbie Bliss Baby Cashmerino. And this yarn has a composition of 55% wool, 33% acrylic, and 12% cashmere. So it is a blend of synthetic and natural fibers. And it's a sport weight yarn. Comes in 125 meter skein of 50 grams. And it is milled in Italy, for those who are interested. And I think that, so I've used this many times. It's really a nice all-purpose yarn. It's very kind of, it has a good twist, and it's very round, so you can get really good stitch definition with it. But you have that extra softness of the cashmere without being too dimensionally unstable, as we would call it in sort of like the textile world, meaning that, you know, with cashmere, it's very fragile if you had 100% cashmere. But when you incorporate just a small amount of it in a yarn, it just lends this wonderful softness and like the slightest hint of a halo, I would also say. But again, it's a 12% cashmere content here, so this doesn't factor in a huge way. But again, this is machine washable. I made the sweater for my son for Rhinebeck with this yarn, and also partly his vest that I just finished, the Serana kids vest. This was one of the yarns that I used to make for that. But I've also made adult items. I've used this for hats in combination with other yarns, like held together with a silk mohair. It's quite beautiful. So, you know, it should go without saying that although I am kind of touting these yarns for babies and kids, that there's nothing that says you can't also use them for adults, because you absolutely can, and I would even say that you should. Something else I should have said from the outset, which is really, really important, is that this video is not sponsored in any way, shape, or form. It is not an advertisement. I am not being influenced to share particular brands or lines of yarn with you. This is just strictly from my own experience, from my own opinions, and I just want that to be perfectly clear that you are welcome to have your own opinions. You're welcome to buy your own things. I am not getting a red cent out of this video. I just simply wanted to sort of share my thoughts because I have spent a lot of time with these yarns, and you know, I think that they're definitely worth considering for your baby and kids projects. In terms of pricing, Debbie Bliss Baby Cashmerino is currently anyway, $11 per skein. And again, this is a 50-gram skein, 125 meters. I think that comes out to, let me check my notes, 142 yards. And so it is a relatively small skein. And, you know, if you're making a larger project, you're going to have to, you know, buy this in larger quantities. This yarn also comes in Aran weight. So if you're looking for a, you know, a chunkier, you know, bigger gauge yarn, you can get sort of the same performance and the same fiber composition from their Aran weight. And the color palette is pretty, I would say it's pretty extensive, but it's also pretty basic. There's nothing like wild or crazy in there. They're all solids. You know, they have neutrals, they have, you know, kind of, you know, primary colors. They have some brights, but, you know, it's pretty much run of the mill, but you're probably gonna find what you're looking for if you have some idea of what you want. Nothing crazy unique, or, you know, no special effects or anything like that. A little detective work has helped me learn that there's another yarn that is the same base from a different brand. And I figured that out because the yarn is milled in Italy. It has the exact same fiber composition, and wouldn't you know, it like looks and feels exactly the same. So this is the Ella Ray Cashmerino Sport. The The ball that I'm holding right now is a speckled version, and the speckled colorways are actually discontinued, unfortunately. I bought them at a local yarn shop's moving sale in the Berkshires, and my guess is that they had these in stock or maybe in back stock for a long time, and but they do still have solid colors. And again, I would expect the colors to be very similar to the Debbie Bliss colors. This comes in exactly the same yardage, 142 yards, 50 grams. The pricing, the current retail pricing for this is $10.95, I believe. That's what my notes say. So pretty much exactly the same as Debbie Bliss. So there's probably a better availability of the LRA Cashmerino Sport. Debbie Bliss, I believe, is only available through Lovecrafts these days, and any place where Lovecrafts distributes. Yarn.com, aka Webs, out of Northampton, Massachusetts, which is probably the biggest online yarn shop, but also brick and mortar yarn store. They were selling Debbie Bliss baby cashmerino, and that's where I bought mine. But I noticed that their selection is dwindling and not being replenished. So, and I know that the ownership of yarn.com has changed. So I'm supposing that maybe those two things are connected, and that in the future it might be that Lovecrafts is the only place to get Debbie Bliss baby cashmerino. And that means that your yarn is going to be shipped from the UK, which may not be what you want. So again, LRA Cashmerino Sport may be the sort of better option going forward. Again, exact same yarn, just different brand, but probably better distribution. I think it's distributed by Knitting Fever. So you'll find this at lots of local yarn shops in the US. The next yarn I want to share with you is Malabrigo Rios. So this is sort of like the ride or die 100% superwash merino worsted weight yarn that is very, very commonly used for all sorts of different types of items, from garments to accessories, for adults, for babies, everything in between. And, you know, there are lots of superwash merino wools out there, you know, from hand dyers, indie dyers, commercial dyers. But I think Malabrigo is a little bit unique in that they provide a really great value for the quality of their product. So a skein of Rios, or a hank, I guess I should say, is 210 yards or 192 meters and 100 grams. And the pricing, the current pricing, again, these prices could be massively in flux because of all the trade wars and the implementation of tariffs. You know, my price tag says $16, but the current MSRP, I believe, is $17 for Rios. But for 210 yards of a hand-dyed superwash merino wool yarn, I think that's a really fantastic value. And so this is probably not the best example to show. It's just the one that I have like in an unwound hank. Their colors are really incredible. They have a range of yarns from tonals, so they don't have any like true solids unless you get like the natural undyed color. They're really well known for their beautiful tonal yarns that have, you know, just this, you know, I can share maybe this swatch that I did out of a colorway called Glazed Carrot, but you can see just sort of this subtle, hey, it matches my fingernails this week. You can see those like subtle differences, that beautiful tonality of just how the yarn is absorbing the dye. this is one of the things that people love about Rios. The other thing people love is it's incredibly soft. It is absolutely next to skin soft. All but the like most sensitive people could wear this right next to their skin and never have a single itch. Rios also has amazing variegated colors. I don't have so many good examples to show you here. I'll put some on the screen in photo form, but I do have a wound, partially used ball. This is called Siri, and it's one of their speckled yarns. I think they probably have more variegated colors than speckled colors, but I really like this one, and I actually paired it with the glazed carrot in a baby bunting that I made for my nephew, which I will put up on the screen. So cute. And I had lots of leftover yarn from that, so I'll definitely be making other things with that for him. Another thing that's really great about Rios when you're thinking about the type of project that you're making is that it has a nice sheen, a little subtle like luster to it, and a really nice drape. So, you know, those are two characteristics you may or may not want with your knit. So something to consider as you're figuring out the best yarn to use when you're making something for babies and children. And in terms of availability, Rios is very, very widely available at many local yarn stores, lots of online shops as well. So, you know, if you haven't tried it yet, then you'll definitely want to check it out, whether it's something for yourself or something you're going to give to the baby or child in your life. In the same vein as Malabrigo Rios, there is an alternative that is what I would consider an even better value, but maybe you lose a little bit on the aesthetic value. This is Cascade Yarns 220 Superwash Merino. The weight of this yarn is worsted to DK. I've used it kind of in both scenarios, and I actually should say I've used Rios as a DK weight yarn too. You can kind of push it, you know, in either direction. Cascade 220 Superwash Merino comes in 100 gram skein, and it's 220 yards or 200 meters. And again, also machine washable. This one does say that you can tumble dry on low. I believe it is the only yarn that I'm sharing today that you can throw in the dryer. Again, on low heat, very important. You know, because it is super washed, your yarn should hopefully not felt in the dryer. But if you want to be most cautious, I would still, just as a matter of course, pull those hand knits out of the laundry before they go in the dryer. But if this happens to go in, then probably nothing too much to worry about. So the hand of this yarn is, I would say, significantly different from Rios. It is still quite soft. It is definitely not as smooth as Rios, and it has a little bit of like a fuzzy, I don't know if you'd be able to see that at all. It has a little bit of like a fuzzy quality to it, which, I don't know, to me it almost looks like less superwashed, you know, compared with, you know, hand dyed yarns and things like that that have more of a luster and more of a drape. This one has a decent drape, but definitely low on the luster scale. So if you want a more matte looking yarn, if you want a yarn that looks more like a traditional wool, then you know, Cascade 220 Superwash Merino is a great option. The pricing of this, again, for 220 yards, hence the name 220, is $13 a skein. So it's less, you know, it's a lower price than Rios. It's a good yardage. I like I personally like the format. It doesn't require any winding. You can pull from the center or from the outside, or both, depending on what you're doing. And again, this is also very widely available at many local yarn stores. I don't think you'll find it at big box stores, but pretty much every type of local yarn store, except for the most sort of high-end boutique stores, will carry Cascade yarns. And that's in the US, of course. I can't really speak for other countries, Europe, Asia, other places in the world, but in the US, Cascade is sort of like bread and butter brand. The next yarn I wanted to share is from Barocco. It is the vintage chunky yarn, and Barocco also has vintage in many other weights. It has DK, a worsted weight. It even comes in fingering weight. So they have something for every project. Barocco Vintage Chunky is 52% acrylic, 40% wool, and 8% nylon. And I had to splice that together because I literally have the short-term memory of a fruit fly. I couldn't remember all of that without looking at my notes for each and every fiber. Unfortunately, I don't have an unused skein of Barocco Vintage Chunky to show you, but I do have a partially used wound cake. So I have used Barocco. I think I've only used Vintage Chunky. I don't think I've used it in the other weights, but it is definitely one of the most popular workhorse yarns, I would say, for baby and kid knits. And I really like their color palette. They have a really nice kind of variety of solids, sort of like the tried and true solids. They have some nice heathered options, including more natural colors that look more like undyed yarn, to brights like this fuchsia color, which is a really pretty heather. And so vintage is more acrylic than anything else. It is slightly more than half acrylic in terms of fiber composition. It has that little bit of fuzz or halo effect, and it has a really incredible softness. It has pretty good stitch definition. Again, it's like that sort of all-purpose yarn that you can use for almost anything. I would say it rivals Malabrigo Rios in terms of the luster and drape. It has a little bit of a different effect in terms of the appearance because it has that extra fuzz, but I definitely would use this for a variety of projects. I've used it for baby blankets most recently, as well as garments for kids. I'll throw a couple of those things on the screen so that you can see them. But this is a very easy yarn to work with. It's really fun to play around with the palette if you have a project that requires a lot of different colors of yarn like I did. Barocco Vintage Chunky and the other weights that vintage comes in also has hand paints and tonals. Those options are a little bit more limited, but they are really nice to have, and it's kind of unique in the category, I would say, of those synthetic blends. They really provide a lot of opportunity to make something really unique and play around with color while using a yarn that is both, durable and beautiful and has a really soft hand. I forgot to take down the pricing of Barocco Vintage Chunky, the current retail pricing, but I'll put that up on the screen as well as in the show notes. Again, just keep in mind that even by the time you see this, those prices may well have changed. And just a heads up that I am recording this when my kids are home from school. I had sent them out to Starbucks. They are back, and apologies if you hear any background noise. hopefully they're far away enough where we won't really hear them too much. All right, so those were my tried and true yarns for baby and kid knits, those workhorse yarns that I turn to again and again, and I do not hesitate to recommend based on my actual experience. There are a couple of yarns that definitely fall into this category that I have not yet used, but that I am on the cusp of using that I also thought were worth sharing. And so the first one that I want to share is a different fiber composition than the ones that we have talked about before. Up until now, we're all in the wool or wool blend area. So we're going to shift over to cotton, which is kind of nice to do this time of year. I'm recording this in the spring, allegedly. I'm in New England, so, you know, spring is sort of like a relative term that it really only is referring to like a group of months on the calendar rather than like the actual climate or weather conditions that we experience this time of year. But I digress. So Juniper Moon Farm Cumulus. This is a cotton and nylon blend. It is 94% cotton, 6% nylon, and it's some sort of special cotton, Israeli Mako cotton or Mako cotton. It is vegan and cruelty-free, but honestly, the best thing about this yarn is the extreme softness. It is off the charts soft, and that nylon, that little bit of nylon has been added for additional strength. So you can feel good about knitting all sorts of garments, blankets, accessories with this, and just know that it's going to be very durable. This is a worsted weight yarn, although the stitch gauge that is listed on the label is 16 to 20 inches per 4 inches or 10 centimeters. So that's really, and that's a knitting range, of course. So this I think could range between worsted and Aran weight. And I actually have plans to use this for an Aran weight baby cardigan. It is a pattern that I received as a gift from a test knit that I did for that Serrana kids vest. It's the Calendula kids cardigan, and it is by Agasalos e Bugalos. And you would think by now, by the third time I've mentioned it on the podcast, I would pronounce it correctly, but I'm probably not. Anyway, she is fabulous and her patterns are great. I chose this pattern as my free gift pattern for participating in the test because I know I'm going to be able to use it again and again and again. It is just one of those basic raglan baby cardigans. I'm going to stripe these two colors with it, and it's going to be a great like spring and summer layer for my nephew who's about to turn 1 like in a couple weeks. The color palette that Cumulus comes in is pretty interesting. So the solids are limited, but I would call the palette very modern. They have some really cool braids, obviously some neutrals, but you can also combine those solids with, or just use alone, these other sort of varieties that they have. They have a dégradé yarn, which is, I think, the French way of saying gradient. They have a rainbow line, which is a multicolored gradient. They have dappled, which is speckled yarn, and it's sort of like self-patterning, or yeah, it's a little bit different than the speckled Rios yarn that I showed you earlier. I would call it maybe self-patterning. And then they have a stripes line, which is self-striping. So there's so many options with this yarn, and I can't emphasize enough how soft it is. It's machine washable, not machine dryable. You do it on gentle cycle cold water. I'm really looking forward to trying this, and I will definitely report out on how I liked it in my experience working with it. And oops, I forgot to write down the pricing, so I will put that up on screen, the current MSRP of Hank of Juniper Moon Farm Cumulus. All right, I do have one more yarn that I want to share with you, which I think was the most surprising and exciting thing that I discovered in the past year. This yarn is called Paka Washi, and it is from the line Ikigai Fiber. And the really exciting, there are many exciting things about it, but the fiber composition is totally surprising for an easy care machine washable yarn. This yarn is 50% wool and 50% alpaca. Yes, alpaca. So you can have this beautiful yarn, and I'm debating, I'm like, which color do I want to show you? Maybe I'll just show you all the colors that I have acquired. And I'm going to put one up close to the screen so that you can see what this yarn looks like. This is a sport weight yarn. I think you could probably use it as a DK as well. All of the skeins I have say dye lot number 1. So this is like a brand new yarn as of, I think, the summer of 2024. So I apparently have yarns from like the first batch of this yarn, which is kind of cool. It makes me not want to use it, but I'm definitely going to use it. So this is 23 to 25 stitches per 4 inches, which is definitely a sport weight gauge. You know, I think depending on the item you're using, you might have the flexibility to like push this either to fingering or DK. You know, depending on your needle. It says US 5 to 7, which is 3.75 to 4.5 millimeter needle. Each skein is 135 yards or 123 meters and 50 grams. So, you know, on the slightly negative side, I would say, is the yardage is not that great. So if you're making a bigger item, you know, you might have to buy a lot of skeins. The pricing is also a little more spendy, but it is a more luxurious yarn. So it's current MSRP is $14 per skein. And you're only getting 135 yards for that. So just something to keep in mind, that it is a little bit more pricey, but you know, this isn't just for babies and kids items. I have several projects lined up for this, and only some of them are for children. Let me put this up so you can see what the yarn looks like. So you can see a little bit of that alpaca floof coming through, like that halo effect, that fuzziness that alpaca is known for. I can't share, unfortunately, how soft the yarn is, but it's incredibly soft, and it's soft in a different way than the Malabrigo Rios or the other, you know, like 100% superwash merino yarn. It has more squish to it. It has more loft and lightness to it, if that makes sense. So I have all of these colors. One of the projects I'm planning with this yarn is Christmas stockings for my family. I'm pulling together a lot, kind of like a mishmash of sport and DK weight yarns for those, because it's going to be the doodle sock, or not the doodle sock, the doodle Christmas stocking pattern from PetiteKnit Co. And I need a lot of different colors because I'm going to do a custom doodle stocking for each member of my family. And I'll put a picture, an example of those stockings so you can see what I'm talking about. My version is not going to just be Christmas colors. I'm going to incorporate colors that sort of go along with the custom motifs that I'm putting for each family member, personalized for each person. So that's a project I'm gonna be working on hot and heavy in the fall. But I'm also planning to knit a dot sweater for my nephew. That's a really adorable pattern. It also comes in adult size. The designer is Pernille Larson, and she is the designer for Knitting for Olive. And I just think that these are made for color work. You know, the stitch definition is going to be like a little bit more fuzzy because of that alpaca content, but if that's something that is appealing for the pattern that you have, then you should absolutely go for it. There's another all over color work sweater that I just found over the past few days that I'm currently obsessed with and is sort of rising through the ranks of my queue, although I'm not feeling like this is the right time of year to work on it. It is a pattern by Tate Besh. I think it's Tate Besh. And it's Orlan Souquet, and she is a French designer. And actually, interestingly enough, the only pattern I've knit of hers is a baby cardigan, but I have recently purchased several of her patterns, one of which is this all over color work sweater that I'm showing on the screen right now, that I have picked a few colors of these, I think four colors to use together, and I'm really excited about it. So I don't know what sort of voodoo magic they did on this yarn to make it machine washable, but they really do emphasize, Ikigai emphasizes that they have done this treatment in a very environmentally friendly and sustainable way, without, you know, adding chemicals to the environment, without sort of applying a, you know, synthetic finish on the fibers, and that the uniqueness of this treatment allows the natural characteristics of the fibers to be maintained. So, you know, it feels like a normal like wool alpaca blend. It doesn't feel like it has any sort of like special powers or like weird, like unnatural smoothness or anything like that. And again, it just looks, normal, for lack of a better term. So, you know, it sounds a little bit like sorcery, but, you know, I'm definitely here for it, and I can't wait to try these yarns. Again, I don't have firsthand experience, so I can't provide my, you know, time-tested review of this yet, but I definitely will once I am able to use this on a project and see how it performs and how it wears over time. That is all I have for this week. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I would love to hear if you like this format of a more topical podcast versus, you know, sort of like a what am I working on and like what are my finished objects, and you know, I'm planning to do that from time to time, but I'm thinking maybe more like once a month so that I have, you know, maybe a little more progress to share on more things. And if there are topics that you're interested in that you would like me to talk about on a future episode, please do share with me in the comments. I would love to hear from you. If you have any comments or questions, if you just want to say hi and let me know where you're watching from, I would love to hear from you. I do post longer form videos every Thursday, and so that's when you can expect to hear from me next. And if you liked this video, please give it a like, and I'd love it also if you would like to subscribe to my channel to do so and to set up those notifications so that you can be notified when there is new content to view. Thank you again for watching this video about my favorite workhorse yarns for baby and kid knits. Thank you for watching Knitting on the Lake. Happy knitting until I see you next time.